Welcome to the Make Your Mark podcast. Hey everyone, I'm Mark Moyer, author of Win Again, speaker, career coach, and business advisor. And I help athletes, executives, and entrepreneurs reach their fullest potential. What you're going to be hearing in every single episode are conversations with athletes and other sports-related influencers. And we'll be offering you the insight that you need to succeed in life, including advice that will let you jump past your competition, whether it be for a great new job or taking your business to a much, much higher level. Make sure to connect with me on social media at Mark Moyer Coach and go to my website, markmoyer.com, to get access to the tips and strategies that my coaching clients get directly. If you're looking for ways to make your mark, send me an email to mark@markmoyer.com and I'll get you going right away. Thanks for joining me today. It's going to be an awesome episode. Now, are you ready to make your mark? Let's do this. Welcome to the Make Your Mark podcast. My name is Mark Moyer and I'm super thrilled to have you on board. I'm broadcasting to you live from New York City. And if you're listening here in New York, somewhere else in the United States, or anywhere else on our great planet, thanks for being on board. Super thrilled. I just finished speaking with Otis Hooper, and Hoop, please call him Hoop. Great guy, funny guy, military veteran who's really making such an impact today. This is a guy who's spent 19 years serving our military and our nation as a pilot in the Air Force and National Guard. He's done some amazing things, certainly been in combat, all kinds of stuff. But now he's also doing so many other things. He's working for a company called Afterburner, which goes really takes a military approach into corporations. He's been a contestant on American Ninja Warrior. He's been an Ironman triathlete. He's an actor. Like, just so much stuff going on with him. It's really a great episode. You're going to really love it. But before you jump into it, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Click on that subscribe button, whether you're listening to this on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Spotify, wherever you're listening to it, just subscribe, please. And go to my website anytime, markmoyer.com, for access to all the episodes. They've all been great. And also content that really will help take your business and your career to a whole new level. You can check it all out there. But without further delay, you've got to listen to the Hoop. He's awesome, great guy, funny guy, incredibly, interesting stories, but very motivational. You're going to love this episode. Happy listening. Welcome to the Make Your Mark podcast. My name is Mark Moyer, and I'm super duper thrilled to have Hoop on board. Otis Hooper, where are you hailing from?
Hey, Mark, I'm living here in Atlanta, Georgia.
Atlanta, from what I understand, I think I remember someone telling me, is a sort of a crisscross. Is that right? And then you're either like from Northwest, something like that, or how's that work?
Yeah, sort of like that. I moved here about 2 years ago, but I haven't spent a whole lot of time here in Atlanta. I'm always traveling on the road, but I live in the northeastern section of Atlanta. So Marietta, Georgia.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And so you haven't spent much time there, but I know that, you've traveled a ton, as you said. But what I want to tell the guests and the listeners, is that you've not only accomplished a lot of different things, but I love what you're doing going forward. And we're going to be talking about that in a minute. But you're an accomplished pilot, Air Force pilot, and you've done tons of not just flight time, but instruction time. And you are an American Ninja Warrior, a triathlete, Ironman triathlete. You've done all kinds of things, and we're going to touch on all those. But a lot of what I want to talk about also is some of the work that you're doing with Afterburner, because my big passion is really helping not just our veterans, but also athletes transition from their sport or from military into what they're doing now. And, a lot of times they struggle with that transition. And I think it's guys like you, I guess, and me, but really make that a much easier transition. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But really starting out, give me a sense of, number one, I guess, a little brief bio of where you were sort of born and raised and what really got you interested in the military in the first place.
So I was born and raised in Newport News, Virginia, which is near Langley Air Force Base. A lot of military, and I grew up with my dad and my brother, so in an all male household. And our family business was karate, actually. So my dad owned a karate school, and so I grew up in a karate school. That was our family business. That's what I did after school. So there was a lot of discipline, a lot of sports activities involved with my upbringing. And to be honest with you, I really had no desire to be in the military whatsoever. When it was time for me to apply to colleges, I started to apply to different colleges, Duke, UVA, Virginia Tech, Howard University, and then the Air Force Academy. And so I got into most of those colleges, but I didn't get a scholarship to any of them. And I got into the Air Force Academy. And for those that know, the Air Force Academy, it doesn't cost anything. It's a full scholarship to get in. So me applying to the Air Force Academy was kind of my dad setting me up to have options. And so when it was time to make a decision, my dad goes, all right, son, $25,000 to this college or $0 to this college, the Air Force Academy. And so it was an easy decision for us. We didn't have a whole lot of money. So I went to the Air Force Academy. And that's how I ended up in the military.
That's I always love these stories because so many times people end up in things by accident and just by sheer luck, right? But they make the best of it, and certainly you've really run with that. So tell me a little bit about your time at the academy itself, and what was it that got you interested in flying versus doing some of the. I mean, because I think most people don't necessarily realize that it's a fairly small percentage of people that are in the Air Force that actually fly. There's so much support that goes on that's critical to the mission, right?
Well, that's really true. And again, I had no desire to be a pilot. So I had no desire to be in the military, no desire to be a pilot. But what I did enjoy doing was leading and inspiring others and affecting change. And so while I was there over the course of the 4 years, we listened to many different leaders, learned a lot about military history, and folks would come in and talk. And what I observed was those that are in the Air Force or specifically in the Air Force, the folks that could affect the change the most, that were the leaders of the organizations, happened to have wings on their chest. They were pilots. And so I figured out that for me, the fastest way to affect change and to lead was to be a pilot. And so that's why I decided to become a pilot. It wasn't necessarily because I fell in love with the flying piece of it. It was just I wanted to be in a position to help others, to affect change, and to lead. So what I did while I was at the Air Force Academy was there's lots of different ways to do that. All of us, all the cadets that are there, we either take a soaring class, which is gliders. So we're flying gliders, or we're doing jump school. So we jump out of airplanes, parachute. So I took the glider course. I said, all right, this is kind of cool. So I became a glider instructor pilot. So I think it was a junior. As a junior, I'm teaching the freshmen and sophomores how to fly. So I'm sitting in the back seat of the airplane. We get towed up and we disconnect from the tow plane. Right. We're a glider. We're a glider, and I'm learning the basics of teaching and also of flying, and that helped me transition into pilot training.
And so how do you end up deciding, or how is it decided for you what type of aircraft you fly?
So when you're in pilot training is about a year long. And there's two different phases of pilot training. So the first phase is everybody learns in the same kind of plane. For me, it was a T-37. Now, current day, it's a T-6. And based on how you do in that phase, the first 6 months, you either go fighter track, so you go fly fighters, or you go fly heavies, or you could go fly helicopters. And so for me, I was in the upper half of my class, and I elected to go heavies. I didn't want to fly fighters. So heavies was my track. So I ended up flying the T1. So the last 6 months was a T1. It's a trainer that all heavy pilots fly. And so in that, you're rack and stack based on how well you do. Say there's 20 students in your class, 1 through 20. At the end of that 1 year, if you're number one guy, whatever the Air Force needs, the Air Force says we have these list of planes, these 20 airplanes that is assigned to your class. You just pick 1 through 20. And the number 20 guy gets whatever's left over.
And where were you?
I ended up somewhere in the top half.
All right, cool.
It's tough. I mean, everybody is really good at that point.
Of course.
And any mistake, any error can move you, shift you in your class. But it's interesting. Some people don't want props. I didn't want a prop, so I didn't want to fly C-130. Nothing against C-130 pilots, but I just didn't want to fly C-130s. So there were a lot of incredible C-130s in my drop. And I ended up taking a KC-135, which was an airborne refueler out of McConnell Air Force Base, which is in Wichita, Kansas. And I did that assignment for about 5 years. Yeah,
I noticed that. And it's interesting because I think, again, you know, the average person out there will say, who's seen whether it's footage of refueling planes and so forth. I think we all think that, like, it's incredible to us that what's needed to be done when two planes are flying at a fairly significant speed, and you're trying to connect the hose into the
boom,
whatever, the term is, and
the boom into the receptacle. Yeah, it's crazy. About 400 miles an hour.
Yeah, and I'm sure, but it's what kind of altitude is that typically done at, give or take?
Usually between 20 and 30,000. Depends on the airplane that's receiving the fuel, but between 20 and 30.
And is it? I mean, I'm assuming it's absolutely essential that you're finding some clean air, right? I mean, it can't be anything turbulent at all, right?
Yeah, you have to. You can't forecast that kind of stuff. So you've got to find it. And that's up to us as the tanker pilots to go, as we basically get a big, huge box in the air. We've got to find that clear air where we can do the refueling. Cause you're right. Once we're connected and we hit turbulence, we feel it. Everybody feels it. And we run the risk of breaking the boom, which could be a bad day for all of us. Yes.
Now, and how many, this is something I'm curious about. When you're up in the air refueling, how many planes can you, I mean, I know it's dependent, but is it something where you can refuel 5, 10, 15 or what? How does that work?
Yeah, we can refuel. It just depends on how much the receiving airplane needs.
Right.
But usually for instance, if we're taking, let's just say the Thunderbirds, a flight of 6 F-16s across the ocean, they can't make it across the ocean. They can fly for about an hour to an hour and a half. So they need an escort. So we escort the flight of 6 F-16s and they just line up on our wing. So here's my airplane, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They line up on our wing. We fly for about an hour. And when it's time to refuel, they come over to the gas station, my airplane, take about, whatever amount of gas they need. We fill them up and then they cycle over to the left. And it's just a continuous cycle. And then we continue flying and then they do it again every hour. But they fly alongside of our wing until we get to the destination. So
now, how often is that done percentage-wise in the dark, or is it rarely done in the dark?
Oh, it's 50-50. It just depends on the mission. So when we're in combat, most of the time, it's almost always 90% of the time it's at night. A lot of times it's low altitude, much lower than 20,000 feet. And just all kinds of different variables that play into it. But we can refuel at night, during the day, in weather. In turbulent conditions, high or low.
Got it. And so you did this for 5 years, and then I know you spent some time, as an instructor for many, maybe 10 years or so, in a sort of a different type of aircraft. But shifting back to the time previously, I know you were stationed overseas for a while, and you flew you were involved with some combat missions. Now, were you were stationed in Iraq itself or somewhere else, or where were you stationed for that?
Yep. So when I was at McConnell Air Force Base, I got there March of 2001. 5 months later, or 6 months later, September 11th hit. September 11th, 2001. So I was a brand new second lieutenant, just learned my airplane. And so that was my experience, was constantly deployed. And as a tanker pilot, so we park just outside of the high density combat area. So I was never deployed into Iraq or Afghanistan. We normally set up shop just outside in a neighboring country, and then we fly over, provide refueling to the airplanes that are executing the mission, and then we land back up in other places. But I was all over the Middle East. All the guys that are listening, they all probably know the deployed secret bases that we were at. But I deployed 8 times in about 3 to 4 year span.
Got it. And these are secret bases. Come on. All right, I'm gonna have to start guessing the countries. Well, I won't do that. Anyway, rhyme with Kuwait. No. Anyway, so you transitioned into doing a different type of instructing. What drove you to make that transition?
Well, for all of us as pilots, you start off as a co-pilot in the right seat, just kind of learning your craft and learning your airplane. And then over time and experience, you move over to the left seat where you're the aircraft commander and you're in charge of the crew. And so I did that pretty quickly, gaining a lot of experience flying as much as I did. And then over time, and if you have the desire to, you're selected to be an instructor pilot. And so that happened for me quickly as well. And like I alluded to earlier, that was my desire, was to lead and to help others get to wherever it is they wanted to get to quickly. So I became an instructor pilot in the KC-135. And then after doing so many deployments, while I was deployed, I had my first son. And he, over the course of time, he was born in 2003. And so in that time period while I was deployed, I only saw him 6 months of his 2-year life. And I realized that wasn't the kind of father that I wanted to be, just absent all the time. And so I decided to make a shift from active duty into the Guard, the Air National Guard. And I found an Air National. I didn't know anything about the Guard or the reserves, which a lot of active duty guys don't. We're not educated on it. We just don't talk about it, but it's one of the best kept secrets out there in the military. And so I started talking to some Guard guys, and they explained to me how it works. And I found a Guard unit in DC, the DC Air National Guard, that also flew airplanes, had a similar mission. And so I transferred. I took my instructor pilot skills. I applied for an instructor pilot position at the DC Guard. And instead of flying KC-135s, airborne refuelers, they have a VIP-SAM, or a VIP mission, where they fly congressmen, senators, White House staff all over the world. And so I started flying those airplanes. Flying is flying. So if you can fly an airborne refueler, you can fly a C-40 or C-38, which is a VIP airplane. So I started doing that, and I really enjoyed that starting in 2005, where I flew those from 2005 to 2014 for about 12 years.
Okay. So were there some people that you flew frequently or not necessarily? Or was it just a random mishmash?
Yeah, it was all Congress. So Congress obviously changes a lot, but for me, being there for 10 to 12 years in different capacities, we got to meet a lot of folks. So I've flown everybody from Hillary Clinton to the First Lady to Barack Obama when he was a senator. So lots of different folks. So that's on the civilian side. On the military side, it's all it can be anyone from a 4-star general to a senior airman.
Now, did you ever notice were some of the congressmen and women sort of chatty and friendly with the pilots versus others that were like, hey, they're going to the back?
Yeah, it just depends on what they have going on. You got to think about it. I mean, it's a flying office, really. So it's incredibly equipped. When they get on the airplane, either they have to rest so that they can provide global diplomacy whenever we land, and it's time to hit the ground, boots on the ground, and hit the ground running. Or if they do have some time or we're headed home, they'll come up to the cockpit. We fly with the cockpit doors open, so they can come up, sit down, and chat with us. When I was flying Hillary Clinton, I was flying her home after Thanksgiving. She sat down with me in the jump seat right here. I'm flying through a thunderstorm. I had to ask her to stop talking for a minute so I could focus and get through this thunderstorm and get us on the ground alive in New York. But no, everybody is normally really friendly, and it's just like we're talking now. I mean, they're just normal people, just like you and I. So it's pretty cool.
Oh, that's great. It's I think a lot of people also don't necessarily see or hear that the whole normal person thing, because they see what they see on TV, right? And it's, I try to say that also with a lot of the athletes that I speak with, that when you speak to them as if they are the big shot professional athlete, then they come across a little bit that way. But when you speak to them as just like the regular guy or woman, from around the corner, I always tell people that there's always a couple people that know Derek Jeter as that punk kid that lived down the block from them when he was 10 years old. And that's just Derek, the punk kid, not Derek Jeter, now owner of the Marlins and all that sort of thing. And it's the same way with most of the athletes. They love talking to people when they're just like one of the people, right? And it's the same thing with military and with government and politicians and so on. So that's great. And so tell me now, I mean, you also do and have done some recruiting, right? So what's the process involved with that?
Well, there's a couple different things that happened in my life that got me to that point, but I can speak specifically to the recruiting. So recruiting command is out at San Antonio, Texas. And what they were specifically trying to do most recently this year is to increase the African-American representation in the cockpit. So increase minorities, Hispanics, African-Americans at pilot training, because the statistics are really they're not good. I mean, there's just not a lot of us out there. So, and including women as well. So they asked me to come on board and to kind of target some specific conventions, some different seminars, and to help the process, help those that were interested in flying get through the process, which can be cumbersome. So I had a chance to go out to a Women in Aviation conference out in California, out in March, where they have, and it's one of the biggest conferences in the world. 4,000 women aviators come out, and I was leading a team of recruiters to kind of talk them through the process of how to apply to get in and be a pilot.
That's great. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's, look, any way we can attract some of the finest people to come in, and whether it's, whether it's in the Air Force case flying or whatever it might be, I think it's the recruiting process itself, or the recruiting function, can be really challenging because on one hand, it's a sales job, really. I mean, you're trying to sell. It's not a product, it's a service. I mean, it's a thing, right? But you're selling the whole notion of, hey, we'd love for you to sacrifice your time, your family time, your everything to come be with us for a while and serve your country, our country. So it's really trying to convince or sell, but it's also something where I think what's really important is for people to see not just what they're going to be doing tomorrow, the next day, but to see how they will benefit forever, for years to come. I mean, the relationships that are made, the network that they're in, the camaraderie, the lifetime of sort of benefits, to me is really what brings people out. But what was your experience?
Well, actually, it's the opposite, to be honest with you. So what I do, and for me, what I do is I don't try to sell at all. And I think that's why Recruiting Command asked me to come in. And like I said in the beginning, I didn't want to be a part of the military. I didn't want to fly airplanes, but they're asking me to come and recruit people to join the military and fly airplanes. And the reason for me, what I found is that I was able to be really good at flying airplanes and lead, but I also found other things that I was passionate about outside of the military. And what I found is that when you talk to those folks that are at these conventions, and they have a lot of different other things that they're passionate about. And if you talk to them and they hear your story where, hey, you ran a triathlon, you've done Ninja Warrior, you're an actor, you're a speaker, and you're in the military, how do you do all of that together? That sounds pretty cool. I just tell them about my experience and what I do and how I've been able to still find and feed those passions that are outside the military. And without selling, it says, you know what, that's I want to serve. I want to be a part of that community. So I can still do the things that I'm excited about. I can still work on cars, or I can still go to, go compete in obstacle races. Yeah, sure. You can still do those things. And so instead of selling, it's just finding out what they enjoy and finding out what they value and saying, hey, you can still do those things. You don't have to give that up. And then in exchange for being a part of the military. And that's what I think has been most valuable.
I think, I'm so happy you said that, because, it's funny, when I was saying the selling thing, part of what I was referencing was that the successful ones are the ones that, one of my little things is I like to say, don't sell yourself, allow yourself to be bought. And it's the same thing where the best people that do this sort of thing allow the other person to buy instead of you selling. So they're hearing your story and they're saying, you know what, I like how that sounds, I'm interested, instead of, hey, you should do this kind of thing. So that's fantastic. So I want to shift gears a little bit. We're going to talk about Afterburner in a minute, but I also want to talk about what you just mentioned a few minutes ago, how you keep yourself busy with all these other things. So I will start with American Ninja Warrior. This is anybody who's watched it. I've watched many of these episodes. It's incredible. You're seeing men and women who are not just incredibly physically fit, but you have to be sort of mentally in the right place, at least while you're running through this obstacle course. But for those people that don't necessarily know what it's about, why don't you walk us through what the competition is like?
Yeah, so American Ninja Warrior, I think they're on season 11 now. So 11 years they've been running, but it's an obstacle course. And each year they select several individuals to run through this obstacle course. And it's about 5 to 10 different obstacles that test your strength, endurance, your agility. And it's aired on TV. And then the cool part about it is they usually the contestants have a kind of a backstory on how they got there, and it's kind of interesting, and usually it's pretty inspiring. And so when I applied to be a contestant on American Ninja Warrior, I really wasn't in my radar. I wasn't aiming for that. That was not my goal. It wasn't my target. I was training for a triathlon, an Ironman triathlon. And prior to that, I had just come off of competing on the Mr. Olympia bodybuilding stage, where I was top 40 men's physique competitor in the world. So that has a whole nother story in itself. So I was 3% body fat, 200 pounds, training for an Ironman triathlon, which is an ultimate test in endurance. That was where my mindset was. My kids, I have 4 boys. My kids were like, Dad, you already got the strength. You got the endurance. Why don't you apply for American Ninja Warrior? I'm like, you guys are trying to kill me. But okay. Why not? What can it hurt, right? So I put together a 3-minute little demo tape, sent it off to NBC, and forgot about it. And so about 3 weeks prior to the show taping in Daytona Beach, Florida, I got a call from the producers, and they said, hey, Hoop, dude, we love your story. We would love for you to compete on our show. Come on down to Daytona Beach, Florida, and let's see what you got on the obstacle course. And so a lot of these guys, as most of the people that know and watch the show, they build obstacle courses in their backyard. They train for years and years and years. I went in with 0 training. No training whatsoever on these specific obstacles. But growing up in a karate school, right? Grew up in a karate school, 12 years of Taekwondo training with discipline and just running around and being a kid. I'm like, all right, it's just an obstacle course. It's not that tough. So I get on the course, and as I'm going through the course, it was really cool. My kids were there running alongside me. I think it was on the 3rd obstacle. Because I was such a big guy, it's built for more guys that are probably about 140 pounds, crazy grip strength. But it was an obstacle where I had to hang, and my whole body was hanging. So I go, and it's like a telephone pole you had to grab onto. And as I go down and drops, my body weight just kind of pulled me down, and I crashed into the water about halfway through. But it was a really fun experience, and really, really incredible. And my story was aired on TV, on national TV, which was cool too. So, it was a great experience. Really, really cool experience.
I'm sure. And, I'm assuming that now, do they, do all the contestants kind of hang with each other before and after, or is it everyone's kind of separated a little bit, or everyone's got their own, getting themselves psyched up, or what was your experience with that?
Yeah, everybody's different. So there's about 125 contestants that run the course in the course of a night. So they shoot it at night. Normally it's shot between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. So everybody gets a number. I think my number was in the 30s, 37, 38, something like that. For me, I'm more of when I'm focused on a goal, I'm kind of going to my own little world, and I'm in my own zone. Some of the other guys are clowning around and joking around, but that's how they stay loose. But man, when you're running on the course, everybody's cheering for you. The audience members are usually members of the contestants' family or friends. You can have up to 20 folks in there, but they shift the audience as the contestants run through the night. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. And one other thing that most people don't know is they change the course slightly as the night goes on. So if the first, let's say 20 to 30 folks are doing really good and they're flying through the obstacles, they'll make it harder. They'll pause it, and they'll pause it for about 30 minutes, and they'll shift the obstacles around. They'll put more space in between, and they'll make it harder because everybody can't win. They want to see some guys crash, right? And vice versa. If it's too hard and everybody's failing on the 3rd obstacle, they may bring it in closer or may adjust a rig here or there to make sure that some guys get through or gals get through. So it's interesting to watch behind the scenes how it all goes down, but it's really cool how they put the stories together.
Oh, that's great. Well, and look, so everybody's got to YouTube you and check it out, right?
Yeah. I put the run on YouTube, so it's out there, and most people have seen it before, so it's pretty cool.
Great. And you're also, as you said, involved with the Ironman, and what got you interested in that in the first place? Because it's we'll tell you what, I'll let you talk about it. I mean, go ahead and tell us the distances and what's involved.
Sure. So the Ironman triathlon was kind of it was a carryover from, like I said, the bodybuilding, what I was doing, getting in shape. And I wanted to kind of refocus and keep the energy and momentum going that I had really coming off of that bodybuilding stage. And so I applied this process of growth and goal setting. And I said, I wonder if the same thing will apply to an endurance race. And so I didn't know anything about triathlons. I could swim with my kids, but I didn't know how to swim in open water. I didn't really have any technique. As far as the bike goes, I'd only ridden a Huffy around the neighborhood with my kids. So I'm not a bike rider. And again, being 200 pounds, I was not trying to ride on a bike with a little small seat, for hours on end. And then, no kidding, the longest I'd ever run, because of the final piece is the run, a marathon at the end. The longest I'd ever run was a 5K, which is 3.1 miles. So it's a 26 mile. I've never run a marathon. So I figured this was a challenging enough event for me to really be focused and apply and to tell a story along the way. So I told the story through Instagram. So I recorded my first swim. It was terrible. I sunk to the bottom because I'm just solid muscle at that point, and I just sunk right to the bottom. I had no technique. So a guy in Dubai saw my video, and he qualified for the Olympics. And he said, "Hey man, I'd love to teach you. I've been following your bodybuilding journey. I'd love to teach you how to swim through just online lessons." So I said, "Sure, man, if you're willing to teach me." So I learned through him on how to swim properly in open water. And then as I started to learn, my technique started to get better. I started to improve. I gave myself 5 months to train for an Ironman triathlon, which is crazy because nobody does that. So what I did was I Googled 5-month Ironman training plan, and a training plan popped up. I looked at it. I said, all right, this looks tough, but I can probably do it. And so I started training. About halfway through, what I did not realize, Mark, was that there are 4 different levels to a triathlon. So there's a sprint, there's an Olympic distance, there's the half Ironman, and then there's the full Ironman. So a sprint takes about an hour and a half to do the 3 sports. So it's swim, bike, and run. Swimming, a full Ironman is 2.4 mile swim. The bike is 112 miles on the bike. And then the run is a marathon, 26.2 miles. I started training for the full Ironman, which takes up to 17 hours to complete. That's the maximum length of time. The beginner triathlon is a sprint, which takes up to an hour and a half to complete all 3. So I did not know that there were different levels. So I started training for the full Ironman. About halfway through my training, 2.5 months, 3 months in, I realized that there's different levels to this thing. But I had already committed to the full Ironman. I didn't tell anybody on social media that's what I was doing. Everyone assumed that I was training for a sprint. And about 2 to 3 weeks before the actual Ironman, I revealed to everyone that, hey, I'm actually going to do a full up Ironman. And man, my inbox, my Instagram was flooded with people telling me not to do it. It's dangerous.
Oh yeah. Wow.
So that somebody died during my Ironman in the swim. I mean, it really is. It's really dangerous, but I trusted my training. I trained hard. And I ended up completing the Ironman in 13 hours and 29 minutes, which was pretty cool. And it was just a great experience. And I had some takeaways from it. But it was a fun experience, and I'm glad I did it. But it was a one and done thing. And it was
one and done. I like it. What was the hardest part for you? Was it the swimming or the biking or what?
I don't usually say this. None of the above.
Oh yeah, good.
For me, it wasn't hard because I trained hard, and I think that's one of the things we do in the military well is we train very, very well. So when it comes time to execute on the battlefield or in the air, the execution's not hard. The training is hard. And so for me, I put myself through very difficult training, and I trained extremely hard for that event. So the event itself was not hard. What I do talk about on stage is the mental part that I was prepared for, but it took me by surprise. So for me, the hardest part was the first 5 minutes of the Ironman. And the first event is the swim. And what was hard was not the swimming. It was what happened in my head. So it was 3,000 of us that go into the water at the same time. You can imagine it's like a washing machine. You're in there. There's 3,000 people swimming over top of you, people elbowing you, kicking you. It's dark water. So I had never practiced or trained in open water. I had only trained in a clear swimming pool with a black line to follow. And I never practiced with anybody around me in open, dark water. So I panicked, man. I had a panic attack in the first 5 minutes. Like, no kidding. My heart was beating out of my chest. I couldn't breathe. And I was getting drowned. And so I turned around and I treaded water for 19 minutes and let people pass me, brought my heart rate down, controlled my breathing. And I thought about bailing out at that point. And, but I went back to my training and I'm like, all right, man, 1 rep at a time, 1 lap at a time. And so I saw the buoy in front of me and I decided to just swim to the first buoy. Let's see what happens. So I got to the first buoy and I didn't drown. I'm like, all right, that's a win. I didn't drown. I'm still alive. And I said, all right, let's go to the second buoy. At this point, you have a 2 hour and 20 minute time limit. If you don't get to that, if you don't complete the 2.4 mile swim, you're disqualified. At the rate I was going, there's no way I was going to complete it. But in my mind, I decided, all right, you're not going to quit. You're going to swim for 2 hours and 21 minutes until they pull you out of the water. And so I started swimming. I started going from buoy to buoy, and I realized I'm not the last guy. That was a good thing for me. I'm still alive, and training was starting to come back, and I started to get into a rhythm, and I started to pass people. And then I got into a rhythm. Halfway through, I realized, all right, I'm in good shape. I can actually beat the time. And so my fastest time in training was 1 hour and 20, and I ended up swimming the swim in 1 hour and 49, which accounts for that 19 minutes of
I was going to say,
of treading water, where I had to get out of my own head and realize that, look, man, you've trained for this, for you've trained for this moment. Just trust your training and get through it. And I think a lot of those things can apply to military vets. We've trained for a long time in doing what we've done. It's just about translating the skills that we have into where we are today, and just taking the first step, going to that first buoy or completing that first rep. Once you start doing that process and you get into the rhythm, you realize, man, it's just a lap pool in clear water with a black line, and just go for it. So for me, the event itself wasn't necessarily that hard. It was just getting out of my own head.
That's and this is a great segue into the next section. But before we do that, was the open water? Was it was it the ocean or was it a lake?
It was a lake.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Because the saltwater thing, I don't know.
Yeah, that was intentional. So I intentionally chose a lake. I did not want to swim in the ocean. I was smart enough to do that. So
good. It's interesting. A previous guest of mine, his name is Robert Hamilton Owens. He's 66. He's the world's fittest 66-year-old, he calls himself. And he's done several of the Hawaii Ironmans, and he's a pararescue man, actually. And,
okay.
A variety of things, but the notion of the ocean, anyway, of the idea of just swimming out in Hawaii, just out into the, wild beyonder, and then probably at the same time wondering if there's some, shark checking out your kind of stuff. It's like, it's got to be, that's quite you're right. It's the mental part.
Yeah.
But this is a great segue because you started to talk about how once you get get your mind in the spot of just getting to that first buoy and then going from there. Let's talk a little bit about I know you're doing a variety of things now, including acting. We'll touch on that in a minute, but I want to talk about your experience and your work with Afterburner. If you could just give me a quick sort of description of what Afterburner is, and then also what your involvement is with them.
Sure. So Afterburner is a group of, we call them elite military professionals. I think fighter pilots, Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, VIP pilots like myself. And what we do is we go and we talk to Fortune 500 companies, big businesses, small businesses sometimes, and we just talk about the process that we use in the military to accomplish a mission. It's not complicated, but what we do is we explain how we plan in the military and how we brief the plan. We go execute, and then most importantly, at the end of that, we debrief. And we debrief for the process or the purpose of accelerating future performance. And we repeat that cycle. So plan, brief, execute, debrief. And we talk to businesses about the importance of doing those steps in that order. And then we overlay their business or their whatever it is they're trying to accomplish with that process that we use in the military on how they can accelerate their performance and do it efficiently. So there's probably about 20 to 30 of us that are all over the world. We talk to businesses. I've talked to Google, Microsoft, Nike, Procter & Gamble, lots of different medical companies.
So the small companies and the really small ones. Got it.
Yeah. So it's the range. And that's the cool thing, is that you don't realize in the military sometimes what we do and how efficient we can be, and how that can also apply into the civilian world. So it's been a lot of fun. And usually I speak for about an hour, or we have team building exercises where we can do that for about a half a day.
And you know, what's remarkable about what you're talking about is one of the things I have a mini issue with, I guess, is that a lot of companies hire, let's say, retired athletes, like former NFL players and so forth. But what ends up happening, I find anyway, is that the athlete will come on stage and really start talking about their upbringing. They maybe in a tough neighborhood, had a tough childhood. They started playing football. They met coach inspired them. Then they scored the game-winning touchdown. Then they got injured. Then they got better. Then they scored. Then they went to college. Then they scored the game-winning touchdown. Got injured. Got better. Went to the pros. And then after they left the pros, they fell off the cliff. But then they're back again, and the end. And then everyone stands, gives them a big ovation, and then everybody goes back to their cubicle, their office, whatever, and they're like, "Oh, that was great, but wait." And the point is, or what am I supposed to do? And to me, I think that if an athlete incorporates some level of education into the speech, not just here's my story, but here's how my story can help you, because I'll show you how to get to that first buoy and the second one from there. Yeah. I'll show you how to plan, execute, brief, plan, execute, debrief, right? I mean, these are all things that, what's incredible is that, and I've seen this in my coaching, sometimes when we tell somebody something that we think is almost obvious, and you could be talking to somebody who's incredibly accomplished, but you'd give them that little tidbit, and it's like flipping a switch, right? And suddenly they were like, "Oh my God, I never thought of that," and then they can go this way, and then truly succeed. And I think that that's what you're doing with Afterburners. You're offering information and techniques and strategies that can change anybody and anybody's perspective. I mean, I'm assuming that's the whole point of this.
It is. And the cool part is I do incorporate a little bit of my personal story into the speech. Now, I've only been with Afterburner for 2 years, but I'm able to talk about the techniques of the process because I've been living it for 19 years in the military, right? But the part for me that's a little bit more interesting, I guess, when I'm speaking to other audiences, is that I use this process or a process very similar to it to get in shape. And the part that I talk about that we haven't talked about yet is that when I was doing the VIP flying, when I was the director of operations and then became a squadron commander, I lost myself in the mission. I ended up trying to focus on the next goal and the next just really focused on the mission. And I lost sight of something that was just as important. And that was my health. So I ended up gaining weight. Like, it was 50 pounds overweight. Physically, I wasn't where I wanted to be. And also mentally, I wasn't where I needed to be, not only for myself, but for my family. And so I had to take a break, and I had to pause. And I was probably 15, 16 years in. At that point, I was skyrocketing as far as my career goes, but my personal side was not in great shape. And so I took some time away to focus on that priority, which was myself, and get in shape. And I started use fitness as a vehicle. And when I started to take the energy that I was giving to the mission and I gave it to myself, my whole life changed. Everything changed. And that's what I talk about primarily from stage in the very beginning. And I think a lot of the audience members and even folks on different platforms, social media platforms, specifically LinkedIn, get that. Because you can be so focused on your professional career and lose sight of things that are just as important, probably even more important. And that's your health. And so when I went on this journey to get fit, I took my family along with me. So my kids were a part of the process. My wife was a part of the process. And I told the story through Instagram. and people started to take notice. That's when Men's Health magazine did an article on me. And then movie producers started calling, and just everything started to change. And so I kind of tell that story a little bit on the process and the importance of planning, briefing your team, which my team was my family, then going out and executing, doing it, and then debriefing, and then repeating the process. And then I go into the whole Afterburner model. So that's kind of where people, I think, find value in my story.
And so tell me a little bit now about, so how often are you out there speaking, and where do you see it growing going forward?
Normally I'm talking twice it depends on the season. It's kind of a cyclical business. Most companies are looking to do like a big sales kickoff at the beginning of the year. So January, February, March is usually pretty busy. And the same thing towards the end of the year closeout. So the beginning of the year's first 3 months is pretty busy. The last 3 months of the year is pretty busy. Now from, say April to September is a little bit slower. And that's when I'm able to kind of focus on my military job and training and doing some acting as well. But going forward, normally I speak about once or twice a month. And then from there, I'm doing other things, or I'm doing military events, since I'm still in the reserves as an EBLO.
Okay, so tell me about the acting. Now that you're a hotshot actor, I want to hear about all the different. I mean, so first of all, so you've got an agent, and the agent's pulling in some gigs. Tell me a little bit about how that's going, and what have you found to be, I guess, maybe the biggest challenge? And don't say there's no challenges. You're bothering me with these. I know everything's easy for you, but what's been the hardest thing to do about acting?
Well, when I did the bodybuilding, it was kind of mastering strength, right? Doing the triathlon was mastering endurance. Acting is hard because you're mastering yourself and your mind, and you're putting yourself in a place that you may not be comfortable with. And so it's been the most challenging thing I've ever done. And I have so much respect for actors. They make it look so easy on TV. They really, when you're on set and you see these guys, the professionals, do it, I mean, they're doing it 10 to 15 different takes at the same level of intensity, the same level of emotion, or even higher. Or they bring it down, they bring it up. I mean, it's just such an incredible mastery of themselves and their mind and their emotion. So for me, I kind of stumbled on it when I did the Men's Health thing, and the producers called and said, "Hey man, you want to be in a movie?" "What do you mean a movie?" And so they called me, and that's how my whole acting career started. And it was in the movie Den of Thieves with Gerard Butler and 50 Cent. And so I had a principal role. I was, I think, an LAPD detective. And it was a lot of fun. And I was on set for 2 weeks, saw some of the best do it. And I realized, man, I am completely out of my league. So I went back to DC. I was living in DC at the time, and I took acting classes. I'm like, all right, man, if I'm going to do this, I want to learn how to do it. And so I took some classes. I realized how terrible I was. But for me, again, it was fun. It was the journey of learning something new, a new sport, a new technique, a new whatever. Along the way, I started to kind of pick it up, and now it's more of a hobby. It's not necessarily a job. It's more of a hobby and something that I get to do whenever I get a call.
That's great, though. And look, what's exciting about that is I in looking back, in my case, for example, I've as an author, I've got a book that I can sort of look back on and say, hey, I wrote this book, or I've got these podcasts. There's some things that are sticking around. That's the fun part about acting, is that you can always look back on some of the things that you did, and hopefully they're good enough that you say, well, I'm glad I did that, and not like, oh man, I can't believe I did that. But,
right. There's been some roles that have come across that would have been awesome, but I'm like, there's no way I could look back at myself and see myself on screen doing that. And I'm like, all right, I'll pass on that one. So.
And I won't ask. All right, cool. Well, listen, this has been great so far. I'm going to jump into the next little segment. I call it the Hit Your Mark segment. It's super easy. I'm just going to throw a bunch of questions your way that are really that are layups for you. But okay. I guess one of the things I like to know a little bit. Let me take a step back. Do you in Atlanta, you don't own a boat, do you?
No, I don't.
So if you did, what would you call it?
Options.
Ooh, I like that. That's interesting. Yes. And do you own a pet right now?
I don't, no.
Now, if you had the chance of owning a pet that wasn't a dog or a cat, what do you think you'd get?
Man, I don't know. I got 4 kids, man. They keep me busy enough. I don't know, probably if something really easy and low maintenance. A fish, probably. A cool fish tank, like a shark or something. Something cool. Well, that was cool to look at.
By the way, let me educate you on something here. Having a fish tank is not low maintenance. I've had fish tank. I used to have a saltwater tank for many years when I lived in California and back here in New York. And the thing with saltwater tanks is that you've got to have the perfect environment for them. They're big, beautiful fish, these tropical fish, but they're expensive as all heck. And their life expectancy is not always significantly high. So, and I won't get into a long story, but it's not easy. So no, I think probably, if you want low maintenance, you probably got to get like a turtle.
Yeah.
I had a guy say, "Oh, I'd love a lion." And I was like, "Oh yeah, okay, that's a great idea." And then I forgot. I've had some interesting ones, but anyway, that's pretty good. Fish. That's cheating, by the way. You can't go. Anyway, now, if you had the chance today, tonight, tomorrow to have dinner with 3 people, alive or dead, who would they be?
Muhammad Ali, Barack Obama. I've met him a couple times, but I haven't had dinner with him. I'll have to think about the third one. Let me come back to you on the third one.
Yeah. And what's funny is I've had, and that's been always a great question to ask, because you get people, some people say like, business people, Warren Buffett and Bill Gates and so forth. Other people say, but what's funny is that I get very few people that talk about people way back. Like me, I'd pick like George Washington or Abraham Lincoln, or someone said Jesus. I mean, that'd be kind of pretty interesting, right? Or cool. And then, or like to me, I don't know, maybe hang out and have a beer with Attila the Hun, before he's off to rape and pillage or whatever he's doing. I don't know. Maybe that's not a good example, but people tend to focus on, Ali's a great one, and certainly Obama, but I always wonder what it'd be like to hang out with people in the past and see what it was like. That I'm always thinking about that.
I just thought of the third one. It'd be Eric Thomas, and some of you may not know who that is, but he's a motivational speaker. He goes by ET, the hip hop preacher. But some of his videos inspired me to make a change when I was focused on the professional career, and I was kind of in that transition period. And something he said was turn your pain into your power. And so I was going through a transition, whether it was physical or mental, but a lot of it was in my head. And he said, if you're already in pain, get a reward from it. And he said that, and I'm like, man, I'm in pain right now. I'm going to figure out a way to get a reward from it. And that's kind of how this whole other section of my life this other chapter of my life has started, because I decided to get a reward out of some of the suffering that I was doing. So I'd love to sit down with him and have dinner with him. But I had a chance to meet Tony Robbins was another guy. So I met Tony Robbins at an event. Another guy was Matus. He puts together really cool motivational videos. So I had some folks that were really instrumental that they didn't even know it. But those 3 would probably be it: Muhammad Ali, Barack Obama, and Eric Thomas.
No, those are great. Fabulous. So right now today, if people want to follow you on Instagram, what's the best way to follow you on social media?
It's usually I go by the handle Team Hooper 6. So TEAM Hooper is HOOPER 6, the number 6.
Great. And then also they can find you on LinkedIn too. I know you're there, and you're there a lot, and you contribute quite a bit. So I always appreciate that. But thanks so much for being with me today on the Make Your Mark podcast. What I like to do is really showcase and highlight whether it's athletes or veterans that are really making a significant impact now. And you're certainly doing that, Hoop. I mean, you're doing all these different things, which is great. You didn't talk about necessarily being a zombie on Walking Dead, but I bet that's No, don't do that. That's probably one of those roles where you don't necessarily want to see it someday again. Right. But maybe you'd be one of the good guys on that. But anyway, but thanks so much for being with me today and carving out some time from your busy day, and look forward to seeing all the things that come out. And I'm definitely going to check out your Ninja Warrior performance.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Mark. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, man. Take care.
Thanks so much for joining us today on this episode of Make Your Mark podcast. The goal of the podcast is to help you find ways to make your mark, to succeed in life, and to jump past your competition. Be sure to leave me a review on iTunes and Stitcher, and subscribe to be the first to hear new episodes. If you're looking for ways to make your mark, send me an email, mark@markmoyer.com, and I'll get back to you right away. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.